Hello, I'm Jesse from NotgeldMarket.com. Welcome to the first in a series of videos about a vast, fascinating, and unfortunately often overlooked area of numismatics, Notgeld. What is Notgeld? Well, I'm glad you asked. Notgeld is money that was issued in Germany, and to a lesser extent Austria, by entities other than the national government, usually by cities and towns, but also companies and even private individuals. Notgeld means emergency money, or money printed out of necessity, which leads to the obvious question, what was the emergency? The emergency was, quite simply, the outbreak of World War I on July 28, 1914, which also led to Germany going off of the gold standard a week later on August 4, 1914. This 1-2 punch caused people in Germany to hoard the silver and gold coins, and small change disappeared literally overnight. To meet this emergency shortage of small change, ad hoc paper notes had to be printed on a local basis immediately once World War I began, and this was the dawn of the Notgeld era. Here's an example of one of the earliest Notgeld notes from the city of Allenstein, printed on August 2, 1914. Allenstein was only the second city to issue Notgeld. In this case, a small gray cardboard note that was essentially wartime scrip. Like many of the cities that issued Notgeld in 1914, Allenstein is today part of Poland. This Notgeld from 1914 and 15 is some of the rarest, and the total number of notes printed for each note is often very small indeed. Combine that with the fact that these notes were often issued in places that were about to become World War I battlefields, and you're dealing with some real numismatic rarities. So Notgeld really is a creature of World War I, a war most of us know relatively little about, and it's no wonder because it's such a complex topic. But World War I set the stage for so much of the 20th century, so if you'd like to learn more, I'd encourage you to check out the Great War channel on YouTube. It's an incredible project going week by week through World War I, 100 years later exactly. And it's also incredibly addictive, and with over 200 videos, well, don't say I didn't warn you. This early World War I Notgeld isn't really what we think of as Notgeld today, however. As the war dragged on and the state of emergency became more and more permanent, cities couldn't help but notice that issuing this Notgeld produced badly needed revenue for the municipal coffers. It seemed at first like it would just cost the cities money to print it. After all, they would then just have to redeem the Notgeld issues when people brought them into the city hall to exchange them or deposited them at the local bank, etc. But instead, they were running a large surplus because people were buying the notes to collect them. So even though the German government was now issuing cheap war coins made of zinc or iron, the number of cities issuing Notgeld continued to increase. By 1917, highly collectible notes with illustrations, some even full color, were beginning to emerge. These notes were still intended to circulate and serve as money, and are today called circulating notes, or Verkehrsausgaben in German, or simply Kleingeldscheine, which means small change notes. Unlike the series notes, which were not intended to circulate, which we'll get to shortly. There was still a need for this paper fractional currency, and some cities also began to experiment with issuing Notgeld coins made of cheap wartime metals or metal substitutes like compressed coal dust. In early 1918, however, a new, higher denomination type of Notgeld emerged called Großnotgeld, which literally means large Notgeld. These notes were typically larger in size and denomination, and artists were employed to fill up these larger canvases with local themes or expressions of wartime patriotism like eagle motifs or the Iron Cross, even as Germany was losing the war. As bad as things were for average Germans during World War I, economically speaking, things were about to get a lot worse once the war ended. Not only were crushing war reparations imposed upon Germany under the Treaty of Versailles, but the downward spiral of the value of the mark, or the upward spiral of the denominations on banknotes for us paper money collectors, was just beginning. While in the United States it was the start of the Roaring '20s economic boom, in Germany the situation couldn't have been bleaker. It was during this post-World War I period that the issuing of Notgeld truly exploded, and it became less an emergency substitute for money and more of an artistic and historical document of the times. The word Notgeld itself began to take on a different, perhaps a bit ironic meaning. The word Not means not only emergency or necessity, but also misery, poverty, or need. In fact, the word is, etymologically speaking, related to the word need in English, like in the phrase a time of need. And this was certainly a time of need for the Germans. Some good Samaritans, particularly Quakers from Britain and America, came to Germany to provide food aid and alleviate their hunger at least a little bit, as is depicted on this series note from the city of Gotha. For many Germans, survival depended on foods like dandelion greens and especially the Rutabaga, which became a popular Notgeld motif as a symbol of the Hungersnot, or the famine that the Germans were experiencing. So this post-World War I Notgeld, and this is usually what we think of as Notgeld today, was really more of a document of the poverty, famine, and misery of the German people. It was filled with a gallows humor, poking fun at their predicament, but there was also a sense that the good times would return and that someday with enough hard work their currency would once again be gold and silver. There were extremely artistic notes issued during this time, typically in a series, or a set in other words, which is why we call them series notes today, or Serienscheine in German. The artwork reflected local, political, or religious motifs ranging from deadly serious to wild and whimsical and everything in between. By this time, the cities desperately needed the revenue the sale of these notes to collectors was bringing in, and they made them as attractive, as striking, or sometimes even as shocking as they could in order to make the notes popular with collectors. The result was the world's first banknote collecting craze. These fascinating artistic series notes were never really intended to circulate as money or be redeemed, and the issuers improvised a number of schemes for making sure this didn't happen, beyond simply making them attractive to collectors. Often, the notes were not issued to the public until after their expiration date, and in some cases, the notes issued by charities or political causes were given in exchange for money that was considered a donation to the organization. These Spendenscheine, or donation notes, and also Bausteine, which means bricks, for example as a donation to build a church, are today some of the most rare of the series notes. Collectors eagerly snapped up the notes and preserved them, often in specialized Notgeld albums, and still today, nearly 100 years later, it's not difficult to find series Notgeld in uncirculated condition, at least for the most common sets. By 1922, the series note craze was winding down and the rate of inflation was beginning to accelerate. 1922 saw the resurgence of higher denomination Notgeld that was once again issued for actual use out of actual necessity. Many of these early inflation notes from 1922 are today most commonly found canceled, whether with a hole punch or a stamp or some other means to indicate that the note had been redeemed or deposited. While some of the 1922 inflation notes were artistically quite interesting, for the most part there was a return to the more utilitarian look and feel of the earlier Notgeld and Grossnotgeld. 1923, however, is the final year for Notgeld, and it is the year when, not just in terms of inflation, all hell truly broke loose. Inflation Notgeld was being issued in denominations of hundreds and thousands at the beginning of the year, but by the end of 1923, notes were being issued in the trillions. The highest denomination ever printed on Notgeld is this very rare note, the 100 trillion mark note issued by the city of Düsseldorf. 1923 in Germany was nothing short of complete social and economic breakdown, full of political extremes and many attempted revolutions by various groups of separatists. The most famous is of course Hitler's beer hall putsch in Munich in November of 1923, but it was hardly unique at the time. In some cases, separatists managed to seize the printing presses and began printing their own inflation Notgeld. Here's an example of one of their counterfeit trillion notes from the city of Langenschwalbach in Hessen. One thing you'll learn right away as a collector of inflation notes is that the counting system for extremely large numbers is a little different in German. Eine Million is 1 million, 2 Millionen is 2 million, that's easy. But then you'll see this word Milliarde, that's the German word for billion, so eine Milliarde is 1 billion, and then eine Billion is 1 trillion. Another important fact of this inflation time is the occupation of the Rhineland by French forces. This is the reason why so much of the inflation Notgeld from 1923 is from the Rhineland and Pfalz areas. The French occupied the area because Germany was beginning to default on its payments under the Treaty of Versailles, more or less on purpose. The German government backed a general strike in this occupied region and agreed to pay the wages of the striking workers. These wages were then paid by the cities, companies, and even labor unions of the Rhineland, often in the form of the Notgeld that they issued to workers, for which they were ultimately reimbursed. So even though you see a lot of inflation Notgeld coming from mining or industrial companies in this region, it wasn't because there was a lot of mining and industry going on during this time. Quite the opposite. And this was merely one form of money printing going on at the time. The German national government was also attempting to pay the French war reparations by simply printing more money. Needless to say, this didn't work to reduce the debt, but it did have enormous consequences for the German paper mark. And finally, as all this money printing took its inevitable toll and the complete collapse of the currency was imminent, one last type of Notgeld was issued at the very end of 1923, called Wertbeständiges Notgeld. Wertbeständig means of stable value, and this currency was denominated not in marks, but gold or dollars or often both, as the American dollar was at the time a gold-backed currency. So you'll see notes like this one where the value is given as 1.05 gold marks, which was equal to a $0.25. Other notes were denominated in foodstuffs or whatever other sources of stable value they could find. At the beginning of 1924, measures were taken to stabilize the currency, ending the strike payments and the endless inflationary quantitative easing, and perhaps most importantly, making it illegal for cities, companies, and people to issue their own Notgeld. A new currency, the Rentenmark, was introduced, and that, as they say, was that for Notgeld. So there you have it, the story of Notgeld in a nutshell. Of course, other countries have issued ersatz currency that we could call Notgeld, but never in world history nor in numismatic history has there ever been anything like the Notgeld era in Germany. And hopefully, there never will be again. Feel free to ask any questions below in the comments. No short video could ever touch on everything about this vast subject. I hope to make more in-depth videos about particular types of Notgeld, specific topics or notes, so if you have any suggestions for future videos, please put those in the comments as well. And be sure to check out my website, notgeldmarket.com, where you can find tons of Notgeld of all types. Thanks for watching. Please click like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe if you want to see more like it.
Komm, ich lade dich ein, einmal zum